All right, buckle up because today we're doing a deep dive into a career that's pretty explosive. We're talking about explosives engineers. I'm sure some of you are thinking, Michael Bay,
Yeah.
right? Big explosions and all that.
Yeah, definitely. It's what usually comes to mind, but
But our sources actually say there's a lot more to it than just, pressing a button and watching things go boom.
it's true. There's actually a surprising amount of planning and calculation that goes into it. You're not just blowing things up, you're using explosives as a really precise tool.
So it's less about the blowing things up and more about like calculated precision. What kind of things are they actually doing with these explosives?
So imagine you're on a mining site, right?
Yeah.
And you need to get to a really specific deposit of some mineral buried in the earth. Explosives engineers, they're the ones who design the drilling patterns to actually get to those deposits.
So it's almost like they're, choreographing the earth to give up those resources, but
Right.
instead of music, they're using math and physics and explosives.
That's actually a great way to put it. And the detail involved is incredible. They have to consider things like the type of rock, the environment, even the potential impact on, the surrounding ecosystem. It's a delicate balance.
Wow, so it really is about so much more than I think most people realize. It's not just about the boom, it's about all the thought that goes into making that boom happen safely and effectively.
Exactly. And speaking of boom, safety is a huge part of their job.
Makes sense.
They're the ones who develop the safety protocols for every single blast. And if there's ever a misfire, they're the ones who have to figure out what went wrong and keep it from happening again.
That's got to be a high pressure situation.
Yeah.
What else did you find out about their responsibilities? Anything surprising?
Well, one thing that stood out to me is that they're also responsible for managing what are called explosives magazines.
Explosives magazines.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as just, storing the explosives in a locked room. There are tons of regulations, safety standards, that kind of thing.
So they have to be experts on all of that.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's this really interesting mix of technical know-how, analytical thinking, and then also just a deep understanding of safety regs. That's pretty wild.
It's a pretty demanding job, but really rewarding for those who really like a challenge.
Yeah, and we touched on this a bit already, but it's not always obvious what the day-to-day looks like for these engineers. Like, what kind of environment are we talking about here? Where do they actually work?
Well, it's definitely not your typical office job.
Yeah.
I mean, one day you might be on a construction site getting ready for demolition, and then the next you're out in the middle of nowhere prepping a mine.
It's a pretty different every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the conditions can be tough. Think rugged terrain, crazy weather sometimes. You're constantly around heavy machinery, so it's not for the faint of heart.
You got to be tough for this job.
Yeah.
So when you're on these sites, who are you working with?
So explosives engineers, they're part of a bigger team. You've got geologists who help them understand like the composition of the earth, the rock formations, all of that. Then you've got surveyors making sure those drilling patterns are super precise.
Right, because those are critical.
Oh, yeah. And of course, they work closely with safety inspectors to make sure everything is being done by the book.
So communication's got to be a big part of the job, too. You're not just off doing your own thing.
Exactly. You have to be able to explain what you're doing, especially to people who might not be as familiar with explosives.
Makes sense. Now, one thing that came up in our research was this growing focus on sustainability, in mining, construction, these kinds of industries. So how is that impacting what explosives engineers do? Is this even a job with a future?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it shows how this field is evolving. Sustainability is becoming super important, and, explosives engineers are kind of on the front lines of figuring out how to make it all work.
What do you mean?
Well, they're the ones who are, researching and testing out new types of explosives, ones that are more environmentally friendly, that have fewer emissions, that kind of thing.
So it's not just about getting the job done, but doing it in a way that minimizes the impact, right?
Yeah, and there's actually some really cool stuff happening. Some companies are using advanced computer models to simulate
Watch
explosions.
see what the impact will be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before they even do it, which is incredible. It allows them to make adjustments,
Yeah.
to minimize damage and all of that.
So they're using technology to be more sustainable, which is pretty cool. So with all these changes happening, what's the job market actually looking like?
It's a good time to be an explosives engineer.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's so specialized and there's this big push for sustainability, the demand for skilled engineers is really high.
Hmm.
It's a niche field, for sure, but if you've got the skills and the passion, there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's awesome. Okay, before we get into how someone can actually break into this field, I want to talk about I guess, the pros and cons.
Yeah.
Because we talked about some of the challenges, the tough environments, the high stakes, but let's be real, there's got to be like a cool factor to working with explosives.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell me there's not a part of you that just like loves that you work with explosives.
Right. All right. I'll admit, it's pretty cool. But you always have to remember that safety comes first. It's not about, you know, getting a thrill out of it. It's about having the knowledge and taking it seriously.
Right, of course. So let's talk about those pros and cons. For someone who's listening and thinking this sounds awesome, what are some of the best parts of being an explosives engineer?
Well, like you said, it's definitely a cool job.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the pay is really good.
Yeah, I imagine it would be. It's specialized work.
Exactly. Companies are willing to pay for people who can get the job done safely and effectively. And there's a lot of room to move up, too. Like, you start out, you get some experience under your belt, and then you can become a team lead, manage bigger projects, maybe even specialize in a certain type of blasting.
Oh, like what kind of specializations are there?
Well, there's underwater demolitions,
Oh,
which
wow.
is as intense as it sounds, or you could work with controlled environments, like in quarries or mines.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of career. There are actually a lot of different paths you can take.
Exactly. You could even end up traveling to different parts of the world, depending on the projects you're working on.
So the travel opportunities are good too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the pros, but what about the flip side? What are some of the toughest parts of the job?
Honestly, it can be really stressful. Like, you are dealing with explosives, so there's always going to be an element of risk.
No matter what.
Yeah. And the hours can be long and demanding, especially when you're on site. It's not a 9 to 5 kind of deal.
And you have to always be learning, right? I mean, technology is always changing.
Absolutely. They're constantly developing new explosives, new techniques, and you got to stay on top of it all.
Always learning. Sounds like a career for someone who really likes to be challenged.
You could say that.
Yeah.
You need to have that, that combination of technical skill, being calm under pressure, and just a healthy respect for what you're working with.
Well said. Okay, so for someone who's listening and thinking, all right, you've convinced me, how do I do this? What are the first steps? What kind of education do you need?
So a good foundation in STEM is key. A lot of explosives engineers, they have degrees in like mining engineering, civil engineering, even geology.
How interesting. I can see how they're all related, but I wouldn't have thought of those as, direct paths to becoming an explosives engineer.
Yeah, but within those programs, you're going to be taking courses that are really relevant, things like geotechnical engineering, rock mechanics.
Right, the study of how rocks behave.
Exactly. And of course, any classes on explosives and blasting techniques will give you a head start.
You mentioned a blaster's license earlier. What is that, and how do you get it?
So that's a big one. It's a certification you need to actually handle explosives on the job.
So it's not enough to just have the degree. You got to prove you can actually do it.
Exactly. And each state has its own rules about how to get licensed, so you need to look into that.
Okay, so you've got your education, you've got your license. Any other certifications that would be helpful?
So getting certified as a hazardous materials manager, that's a big one. That shows you know how to handle like all kinds of hazardous materials, not just explosives.
So you're really well-rounded.
Right. And then any OSHA certifications you can get. Those are always good to have.
Safety first. So it seems like you really do have to be dedicated to constantly learning and improving in this field. It's not something you can just like learn once and you're good to go.
It's always changing.
Speaking of changing, we have to talk about how AI is changing the job search process. And specifically, how a platform like RoleCatcher can be a game changer for aspiring explosives engineers. I mean, it seems like AI is everywhere these days.
It really is. And it's definitely changing how companies are hiring. They're using these like AI-powered systems to scan resumes. And if yours isn't optimized for those systems, you might not even get seen by a human.
So how does RoleCatcher help with that?
Well, RoleCatcher actually uses AI to help you tailor your resume and cover letter to the specific job you're applying for, using the right keywords, the right formatting.
So it's like having an AI on your side.
Exactly. And once you get past the resume stage, RoleCatcher also has this huge database of interview questions. They have questions that are specific to like tons of different industries and roles, including explosives engineering.
That's incredible. So you can practice your answers, get comfortable talking about your experience.
Yeah, and the best part is, RoleCatcher's AI will actually listen to your practice answers and give you feedback. It's like having a personal coach.
That's amazing. Talk about a leg up in the job market.
Right. And honestly, I think a tool like that can be super helpful for anyone who's job hunting, not just in this field.
Absolutely. Knowing your stuff and having the right tools, that's a winning combination.
For sure.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about explosives engineering, from the exciting to the challenging to how to actually break into this unique field. It's definitely not your average career path.
Definitely not.
But for those with a passion for science, a love of challenge, and, let's be real, a fascination with things that go boom, it sounds like an incredibly rewarding path.
It is.
So for all of you out there who are ready to take on a challenge and explore the explosive world of, well, explosives, I say go for it.
Yeah.
You might just find your perfect career path. And hey, if you decide to give RoleCatcher a try along the way, let us know. We'd love to hear about your experience.
Definitely.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for sticking with us. And until next time, stay curious.